Welcome back to the Insurgent Mindset. I'm Matt Tice.
And I'm Rondo Moses. This is a podcast about challenger thinking in a world shaped by disruption.
And in each episode, we explore the strategies and leadership mindsets that help businesses break from the pack and stay ahead in fast-changing markets.
You'll hear conversations, case studies, and insights from leaders who are applying these mindsets to thrive in this uncertain environment.
Come find us on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify to find some of our content, and also check out our companion blogs on insurgentsgroup.com for every episode. Now, Rondo, let's get into it today. What are we talking about?
We want to talk about sales and marketing. Are they naturally insurgent functions in an organization, or is that up for debate?
Well, I think we really haven't talked too much, Rondo, about some of the functional sort of roles in organizations, and I think it's easy to sort of contemplate the insurgent mindset from the role from the perspective of the CEO. But if you're a line leader, a functional leader, let's for today's purposes, that's sales and or marketing. Um, how do you bring this mindset into your work, into your team? So, this might be the start of a series that we start to explore some of these functional roles and what it means to be, what it means to think differently and to develop this kind of challenger mindset to, kind of break from the pack in a perhaps a more narrow sense in support of the organization's wider goals.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my experience has been when I speak with leaders in organizations, it's typically the folks in sales or marketing functions who will consistently say that they act and operate more like insurgents. When they see, hear me describe the continuum between incumbents, insurgents, and the characteristics of insurgents, they naturally tend to gravitate toward the insurgent side. And I think largely because they are customer, but specifically from a sales perspective, they're customer facing, or marketing, they're market facing. So they believe that because they are customer and market facing, that makes them an insurgent. And they're always trying things. So they've got a lot of tactics happening, but I always bring them back to that doesn't necessarily mean that you're insurgent just because
Hmm.
you're busy. So activity does not equate necessarily with insurgents.
Sure. And of course, we want the organization to be customer proximate and develop that culture where everyone is really focused on customer outcomes. But I think fundamentally, if you're sitting in a, let's start with sales, if you're sitting in a sales role, there's two sides of it, right? So one, and we've talked a lot about this, is how do you do that role or how do you lead that role really productively and efficiently? So from the point of view of your point, activity. How do we make sure we've got boots on the ground, calls going out, increasingly AI agents engaging with customers to, create activation and drive opportunity? But to me, that's half the story, right? So you can be, really customer centric, but not necessarily in a challenger mindset. To me, it's understanding not just how you activate your customer, but how you do it differently from your competition and how you do it in ways that are meaningfully differentiated on one hand, but potentially also um, meaningfully different in terms of how you deploy limited resources. So that might mean doing it on a different cost curve or creating engagement in special and unique ways. Um, I'll give you an example. One of our clients in insurance underwriting, we ran an innovation seminar for these guys, and I asked, a typical question that I'll ask to warm people up in one of these sessions is, what's the stupidest thing that you could do to engage your customers, right? And one of the things that came out was really interesting, which was let's write them handwritten letters, right? Everyone laughed and thought that was really stupid. But then the CEO is sort of thinking back and is like, you know what? Our sales effort is exactly the same as everyone else in the industry. Why not? Why don't we do that? Why don't we zig when everyone else is zagging? And I think that, often when we look at sales in particular as a machine that is largely dependent on the number of hours in front of a customer per month, per week, per year, whatever, um, we start to lose that sort of that opportunity mindset where, we could really find different ways to create engagement. So now enter technology where, we have agentic AI coming on stream. It's just getting better. It's getting better. It's getting better. Obviously, in the short term, being able to take away a lot of the lower value add activities from salespeople to spend more meaningful time with customers is a key opportunity. But in the middle term, those agents will be interacting with customers directly in real meaningful sales conversations, and then
Mm,
potentially in the future interacting with each other, AI to AI, for example. So there's a lot
mm,
of change coming. And I think that sales leaders now need to step back and start to think about what's the future of selling. Same applies to marketing, but I think there's a lot happening here. But if you really want to break from the pack and create a meaningfully differentiated story in the market, or if you're implementing a new business model, for example, and you're trying to find new ways to create market engagement, you can't just follow the pack. You have to think quite differently.
right. I think back to when I was working in the pharmaceutical industry early in my career. I was in pharmaceutical sales. I started out in pharmaceutical sales and then went in-house as a trainer and then into national accounts management. And I think a lot of what the pharma companies did then, and to some extent still do now, with having sales reps call on doctors, everybody did that. So it was the same, everybody had the same playbook of calling on doctors, detailing, we call them detailing, providing, prescription samples, whining at back then you could take them out to dinner. So everybody did the same things. And then in the late 80s, the industry started to shift a bit. And to this company's credit at the time that I was working for, they recognized the shift away from just, selling to the individual doctor and the importance of selling to the buyer of these pharmaceuticals. So we created the first national accounts management group because back then, national accounts management only involved the government sector part of it. But in this case, we were now recognizing the growth of HMOs and large buying groups, and we started to sell to them, which was a totally different way of selling. And the company was really a pioneer in this regard because it was maybe one other company that had moved in this direction. And it gave this company, I think, a leg up in this whole national accounts management space because they recognized the shift. They recognized they needed to do something differently. In fact, I remember they brought in the IBM national accounts team to train us on how to sell in national accounts. How do you sell to large buyers? Because everybody who was in this group really came up in the more traditional sales rank and was more accustomed to and familiar with selling to individual doctors. Now we had to sell to large buyers who had more of a business frame of mind and thinking about how they would decide which drugs to use, et cetera, or have on formulary. And we had to understand how to sell more of a business sell, that business value proposition. And that was different. That was more of insurgent then, that was more insurgent selling at that
Hmm.
point because we were moving away from what the traditional pharmaceutical sales looked like at the time.
Right. So I think, I like that story. And what I love most about that story is it's analog, right? So it isn't all digital, digital, digital. You're aging yourself a little bit there, Rondo, but
Right.
um, but I think as you're developing that sort of story, what really comes to mind to me is where, in sales, where go to market, right? Market engagement and how do we generate more value um, comes together with operating model, right? How we organize differently and how we engage differently. And then that suggests that those two things come together into almost a mini business model for selling, right?
Yes.
And then starting to think about, how does that recipe for creating that market engagement sort of change as the market evolves, and perhaps as importantly, as you start to reach diminishing returns. So I can imagine in your example where everyone is selling the same way, it becomes a real marginal fight for that sort of one unit of market share, right? Nobody's
Hmm.
away. So the only time you create like any distance in that sort of example is when you got a new blockbuster drug or something like that, which sort of has come on stream, creates some, I've got something new to sell, but
Right.
it's not the selling itself that's different, it's the product that's different, right?
Right.
So I think the insurgent sales function is much more one that thinks about how to rethink selling itself, working back from, really the interface between the company, the customer, and the competition. Think about how to engage the market differently, and then how to do that, how to organize resources differently to achieve, different outcomes. And that's sort of holding products, pricing, and everything else more or less constant. I think there's
Hmm.
lots of opportunity there. I'll give you another example. Sort of in a professional services organization that we've been working with, typically had a lot of the selling concentrated with a relatively small number of people in sales and business development. And these people, their job was to go and sell. But meantime, you have hundreds of other people interacting with potential customers every day. And, one of the big shifts that this company made was to make selling everyone's job and to really push down the selling, build the sales skills deeply into the team, and get everyone from, the receptionist all the way up to, head of business development, deeply involved in the sales process. And then you start to see, you have thousands more conversations a year with the with prospective customers and so forth. So you start to generate that volume of opportunity that didn't exist before. And I think that because sales sometimes is seen as I don't know, your experience at the pharma company would be interesting. It's sort of seen as a bit of a dark art in a sense that only
Right.
certain people can do this dark art. But I would say that the insurgent selling organization is one where, everyone has a role in creating market engagement. Everyone has a role in selling, if not the firm, if not the products, then the firm,
Right.
or the organization. So I think that's another key factor that often gets missed out, where sales is a hard and fast function with very delineated lines around it, and then consequently losing the opportunity to free up more capacity in the rest of the business to drive that additional opportunity. So I think it's an opportunity that's lost in many firms.
Another way I would think about what you just said is in an organization that's an insurgent organization, sales is not the only function that says thinks that they are accountable for customer satisfaction and customer value. It's just that mindset is permeated throughout the organization. Everybody's sort of thinking about what's the impact of the customer? How does this make the customer's life better? How does this create value for the customer? So I do agree with that kind of
Mm,
mindset. And
yeah,
where I sit in the organization, how do I support that? How do I contribute to it?
sure. And then when you go to an organization who has senior leadership, the C-suite or the CEO, with an insurgent mindset, you can recognize them, right? They're in motion, they're impatient, they're driving, driving, driving all the time. They're thinking creatively about, all aspects of their business. They're trying to outmaneuver their competition at all levels. I think really there's just an extension of that culture into selling, right?
Hmm.
Where,
Hmm.
that dynamism is sort of captured in how people are creating that engagement. So your point about bringing creative solutions to, you know, to market engagement problems is really is a key part of it. Then as we move over to marketing, right, which is, you know, kind of like the yin and the yang of selling, right? There's a lot of marketing has changed so much in the last decade and a half, and largely that's been a digital change. But the insurgent marketing function is very similar in many ways too, because whilst we have a lot more technology in in marketing today, we have a ton more data, and we have a lot more tools that are available to marketers. I think that um, while that's true on one hand, we're not necessarily always seeing that sort of creative breakthrough. So I think we're sort of losing a little bit on the creative, getting
Mm.
a lot more on the on the digital. Who knew that influencer marketing was going to be a thing 10 years ago? But I think in some ways we're seeing a kind of a tectonic shift in marketing. And Rhonda, what does the insurgent marketer look like?
I think the insurgent marketer, it's more than just campaigns. I think the insurgent marketer has to be nimble at understanding how, first of all, how is it marketing actually influencing revenue? I think in the past, marketing has been able to get away with just providing campaigns, but not necessarily making that direct correlation between the campaign and actual impact on, let's say, top line revenue growth. So marketing has to be thinking about how are we actually influencing um, campaigns, influencing the ultimate outcomes for our organizations, and that could will probably include a lot of digital marketing activities, being everywhere your customer is and meeting them where they are with a lot of different platforms, through a lot of different platforms. So it can't just be the more traditional channels for marketing. You have to be thinking about what are the newer channels where we can reach our customers that has meaning for them. So, for example, the education organization where I'm on the board, this marketing organization, I think, has been really acting more insurgent in terms of making sure that they're putting out content through various channels, social media, offline, do through the public transportation channels, everywhere we think that potential parents and families are, our potential students will be, they're trying to get the message out and they're using a variety of ways to do that. And the results are coming in and it's showing, we're getting our enrollment numbers are up. We have a thriving pre-K program in the New York City area now that we launched a couple years ago. We're continuing to add new classrooms of pre-K. So it's that, and that's because the marketing flipped. Prior to that, we were, I think, a little more of the incumbent approach to marketing, more the traditional approach to marketing. And now we've just been trying a lot of different things. We're bringing in talent with different skills into this education organization, talent that have marketing skills that we didn't have before. And I think it's showing results.
Okay, so I think that's great. And when I start to think about guerrilla marketing, I think like the meta goal for guerrilla marketing and by extension sales is, fundamentally like how do we disrupt a market? You know what I mean? So is how do you build a marketing machine that can create that sort of significant breakout? Maybe instead of the 1x or the 2x, it's the 3x, the 5x, the 10x, right? And
Mm,
how do you disrupt an established market, right? So that a lot of that is wrapped up in the marketing role in terms of how you do that. And so back in the 80s, I think it was mid 80s, there was a guy by the name of Jay Levinson who wrote this book, which is kind of fallen out of corporate consciousness now. But back in the day, people talked a lot about guerrilla marketing, right? Which
yeah.
was, you know, uh, how do we, using the analogy of guerrilla warfare, fighting in the trenches, sort of thinking differently when your competitor zags, we're going to zig, whatever. And, finding ways to deliver really high impact at, in sometimes at really low cost, right? So now with all these digital tools, it's kind of happening like that almost all the time. But that sort of how do we do it differently? How do we do it cheaper? How do we create cheeky impact into the market? Is kind of like the tactical side of what I would describe as insurgent marketing, which is leveling that up and say, now, how do we do those things at scale to disrupt a market or an industry, right? So
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
essentially, so I don't think it's about the tools so much. I do think it is about the mindset, about how
Yeah.
do you engage um, to create that real breakthrough in the psychology of your customers, and then by extension exchange the psychology of an industry. So there's a to illustrate this point, there's if our listeners have an opportunity to um, review, it's about 10 years old now. There's a wonderful video where the CEO and the marketing team of Dollar Shave Club are
Mm.
talking about essentially how they're going to create this breakthrough with a pretty boring product, Rondo, kind of razor thin, right? With a
Yeah.
really big, fat, slow incumbent with really strong market leadership and a deep moat, Gillette, right?
Yeah.
And if you take the video, and I wish we could show it here, but if you take the video from Dollar Shave Club and a sort of contemporary video of Gillette in terms of their marketing, what you're going to see is a fascinating kind of contrast in the Challenger, the Insurgent Marketing, and Dollar Shave Club, and what's an extremely polished, very highly um, disciplined um, but terribly boring and kind of not particularly engaging story from Gillette, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, what you see with Dollar Shave Club is uh, if you took the ad or any of the ads from that period from Gillette and sort of said, okay, characteristic one, super high polish, right? So then we go over here to Dollar Shave Club, and then you see no polish at all. The guys are in a warehouse driving around in a forklift, right? Then you kind of go down to really slick brand messaging, dark muted colors, and then you go over here and it's like really bright. And then you have this really disciplined kind of what you could tell is a white shoe agency messaging compared to, you know, um, we're providing jobs, why pay all this extra money for the advertising, blah, 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 blah. You could tell that these guys were really strategic in terms of how do we parse the messaging and create something that's just meaningfully different on every dimension. And it's so interesting to watch the contrast between what I would really describe as the insurgent marketer. Every
Yeah.
detail is different, every detail. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And right down to a guy sitting in the factory it's kind of hidden in the background, sitting there reading the Lean Startup. You know what I mean? You can barely see it. You would have had to watch the video 10 or 11 times to actually pick that up.
Pick
And
that up.
it's that subtle engineering of the messaging to be meaningfully different in the sort of the act of disrupting a particular market. I think to me that's like that's pure gold.
There's I came across a bottled water company called Liquid Death. That's the name of the water. And
You see, now I'm interested, right? Or automatic.
they package their water like they package beer. Come in
Okay.
tall cans and small cans, right? And
Right.
the
Yep.
commercials
Yep.
are hilarious. And their messaging is around murder your thirst. So they're about being provocative. It's not about wellness. It's like murder your thirst,
Sure.
you know?
Right.
And
Well, everyone
so
else is selling water. So this is the thing. So now we're not really selling water here, are we? Right? We're sort of we're selling this experience of overcoming thirst or whatever it is. It's just completely different.
completely different, right? And just the whole approach is more like, I mean, the fact that they're modeling themselves behind how beer would be packaged, right? And it's supposed to be water, it's supposed to be healthy. So they've decided to sort of say, hey, we're not going to lean into the wellness part, even though we're water. We're going
Mm,
to sort of go different. We're going to sort of be really edgy and provocative.
right.
That's insurgent marketing.
Hmm. So now I love that, but in both of these cases, these are the challengers, right? Dollar Shave Club is literally the little guy. They created this, sort of mail order business model, which is, really quite clever. They're,
Yeah.
you know, they kind of also followed almost like the Christensen playbook and have decided to challenge on cost, right? Sort of, Gillette with 70-80% market share is able to, kind of drive the market price. But these guys are offering up this solution, literally Dollar Shave Club. It's like $1 a week or something like that, right? Sure, it's not that cheap anymore, but so they're coming in, and it is the challenger. Now, I think it's interesting to flip the script when you are a Gillette, or you are the traditional water company, or you are the big pharma, right? And how do you build
Yeah,
this culture into marketing and sales when they're just so risk averse? They want to use, they want to use the agency. They listen to the agency. They're very slow to move. They're very disciplined with their products, and it's all very important. But what you
right.
then see is, a very slow, kind of almost tectonic change in how these products sort of ebb and flow in the market. So, Rondo, what do you tell the incumbent marketer or the incumbent director of sales in the big end of town? How can these guys operate differently?
I think to your point, I think they have to figure out how do you create a new playbook that sort of bucks the traditional playbook of, going through agencies and the traditional channels. How can you create, if you were to create a new playbook, what would be some of the elements that would be in it that you wouldn't find in a traditional playbook? Like, maybe instead of it going through a traditional agency, you're working with smaller, more independent marketers who are known for being more provocative and edgier. So but you're not going to the white glove agency that you've spent, millions of dollars with in the past. You try something different, in terms
Mhm.
of agency, and you're specifically looking for agencies that have proven to be more creative and innovative and edgier, I would say, or
Mhm.
provocative, because that's
Right.
what you need, you know?
I think I would try to follow our advice, Rondo, which is start with the customer and work back from there, right?
Yes.
If I'm a sales guy, right, how can I get the customer to sell for me, right? How do I create that leverage? If I'm a marketing person, right, how do I get the customer engaged in the marketing? You know what I mean? Like, I don't
I
know if
guess that's what Netflix did when it came on the scene, right?
yeah,
Word of
develop.
mouth. That's right. It
Yep. Well,
was
just for
all
our
word of mouth.
listeners, develop that a little bit, Rondo. Yep.
Yeah, because I mean, when you think about blockbusters, you had the retail stores, they spent lots of money on marketing. And when Netflix came out in the late 90s, it was the DVDs through the mail, but they spent very little on marketing, it was all word of mouth, how they got the word out. The customers were so satisfied with the business model and the product that they told others in their network about it. And that's how it grew. That's how the word got out. And so to your earlier point, this is sort of like the guerrilla marketing in a sense because you've got the customers who are your salespeople out there. And I think it's somewhat like what Tesla did by going direct. It was
Hmm.
really more the customers who were really marketing, their Teslas to their friends and family, et cetera, because they were so pleased at the time with that technology. They weren't going through the traditional dealerships that more the other automotive companies were going through, the
Right.
traditional sales and marketing.
So then you're sort of embedding this co-creation almost into the marketing and sales function, which has like the triple benefit of, obviously it brings everyone in the firm much closer to the customer. That's a win, right?
Yeah,
Two is it brings the customer into the value creation of the firm, which can only be a win. And certainly customers will tell you whether or not, they'll tell you and they'll respond one way or the other. So it's almost that instant feedback, which is, terrifically valuable. But then most importantly is it creates this leverage, which allows you to do a lot more with the
right,
resources that you have, right?
right.
So it's kind of like a multiplier, a force multiplier in terms of your sales and marketing dollars when you have other people doing it for you, which, and ideally your customer. Um, or even in the Dollar Shave Club example, where you almost have your competitor doing it for you because it's sort of like judo. You're using the weaknesses of your competitor to your advantage in your marketing.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of interesting territory to explore there. Like if you're a marketing leader, I am looking at this thing. What we're doing is all the traditional stuff. Over here, we got digital, running all of our digital campaigns. Over here, we got our agency stuff. We're running our ads. Over here, we've got our product marketing, and we're doing that way. And we're following that same formula that we followed and followed and followed. But we're at diminishing returns. We're not getting the breakthrough. We're not seeing the market share. I think that's the time where you step back and say, okay, it's not so much that we're doing the wrong things, but
Hmm.
we don't have the leverage, one. Maybe we don't have the operating model in terms of how we deploy those resources differently and more efficiently. Um, Two, and then we don't have that breakthrough sort of challenger mindset built into everyone doing this work. You know what I mean? It's sort of like
Yeah.
that really conservative incumbent sort of behavior then drowns out creativity of, doing things a little bit differently. Same again with sales, where, it's much harder for sales because these guys are out there, they're running formulaic, it's just the formula, have the conversation, do these many sales calls, and obviously
Right.
the numbers do drive selling. But I think that what leaders need to really do is sort of discover where's the leverage in this work, and how do you create this multiplier effect that gives you an opportunity to break out.
But if you go with the co-creation approach, which I love, you have to also make sure that other parts of the organization are as agile and willing to sort of take what's coming in from the customer and leverage that to either create the product or enhance the current whatever is currently available so that you create this virtuous cycle of, sales and marketing is getting that feedback from customers, is getting fed back inside the organization that's being used to make current products better or develop the new products. Like it all has to fit together, right?
I couldn't agree more. So I think as we level this up and sort of get back into the territory of the CEO mindset, right, really requires the CEO to allow, well, I guess you got to do three things. Is you got to allow sales and marketing to take some risks, right? You got to
Right,
encourage them to not only take those risks in terms of doing the sales and marketing differently, but organizing and optimizing a little bit differently. And then, I guess to your point, then also you've got to encourage, them to you gotta disincentivize the silos, right? So that
right.
you're getting a much more liquid flow of ideas back from the customer through the organization. And you have less sort of you're lowering the walls between sales, marketing, and the rest of the business, which, as you know as well as anyone, Rondo, those walls can be very high, right?
Yeah.
And these are almost like fortresses inside lots of particularly big organizations. And it's while the data might be flowing into marketing, it's not necessarily flowing into marketing out to the rest of the business. You know what I
Right.
mean? And I think
But
that's what
I also think it means that the organization CEOs need to think about what are the metrics that they're using to measure success, because the traditional metrics are what I would think sometimes drive the traditional behavior. So what are the metrics that you're going to really lean into, such as, customer lifetime value or the percentage of your revenue coming from new products and new customers? Like what metrics are you using to really drive the kind of behavior that you want in the
I
organization?
mean, those are good metrics, Rondo, but I'd say that still has a, kind of those are what I call transition metrics between the incumbent and the insurgent, right? I think even better if you're sort of challenging your teams to say now, okay, how can I get 5x the leverage with half the cost? You know what I mean? Like,
Okay.
find me a way to create, this much more impact at half the cost, which just forces people to say, now I need to be in a mindset of reinventing this thing to do it differently. So all of a sudden now
Mhm.
you got this Dollar Shave, the startup, the real insurgent, the guys that are coming up, they don't have all those resources. So by design, they've got to be clever and creative, right? But
Right.
what happens is when you have all the resources, you get super lazy and no one's asking the question. Like if you were these guys with no money, right? And you had to challenge up to us, what would you do? Now you go and
Mm,
figure that out and do it here so that not only are you creating a more dynamic sort of sales and marketing environment, but you're also kind of insulating yourself a little bit from those challengers that are automatically thinking that way. Because they don't have any choice, they just don't have the resources. You got 50 salespeople, they got five, right? You got $5 million of marketing budget, they have 500,000. You know what I mean? But they
right,
still, the water guys that you mentioned earlier, they're still going to challenge these incumbents, right? They're going to come after them. They're doing something meaningfully different. They're starting to take share. Now, these guys who have been locked into, we're selling water. Meanwhile, these guys are selling something else, right?
right, right,
You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden, yeah, gosh, why didn't somebody think about that before? I can put cool, clever sort of I can make the can a thing in water. You know what I mean?
right.
It's water. Now at the can, it's interesting. And I think so like if you're going to challenge into water, you're not just going to sell a bottle of water that's transparent and has a little sticker on it with your brand on it. No one's going to buy that, or at least you're not
Yeah,
going to have the resources because you don't have the scale to challenge up that way. So you got to do it
right.
different.
But when you think about a traditional incumbent organization, how many of these insurgent like ideas or strategies do you think that they could manage in over, let's say, a year or 3 years? Should they be focused on everything that they're like these insurgent, high value 5X kinds of ideas? Will they actually be able to manage at any given time?
Yeah, I think in some ways less is more, right? You have to build up, like, you have to build the muscle to be able to do this stuff. So
Right,
be a fool as a chief marketing officer to come in on day one and say, okay, guys, we're going to do this everywhere all at once, right?
right.
So you got to build the muscle. So it's sort of like maybe you've got an underperforming product category that needs, okay, do we kill it off? Do we invest a ton of money to shift it out, or do we rethink it and do it completely differently? I would
Hmm.
say, coming back into sort of the lean startup mentality, the agile mentality is to say, we're going to start running these experiments. And then as we learn and start to develop this capability, then we'll syndicate that capability to more and more opportunities, right? And there's still a place for the incumbent approach. The when I'm not saying that the agency goes away, and I'm not saying that your digital campaign approach is inappropriate, but what I am saying is if you want to get breakthroughs, you have to you have to compete differently, and to compete differently, that means a first and foremost a different sales and marketing mindset, but then turning that mindset into an alternative operating model and a different market engagement approach, and perhaps
Right.
taking it to the extent that we talked about co-creation and other ways to create leverage that might not otherwise be obvious because frankly you have too much money and too many people. You've lost that ability to create that kind of dynamic challenger marketing that you might otherwise would have been able to, you would have been able to you might have done it earlier in your career, or you might
Hmm.
have done it in another context, but when you're at Coca-Cola, that's just not how it's done here. But
So I guess it comes back to a principle that we've talked about a lot, which is, recognizing what are the fundamental assumptions that you're operating under and how do you challenge some of those assumptions to create something different and better, right?
and that is the fundamental, like the most important element of how you architect new models, right? So if you're going to create a new sales operating model and go to market model, what are the assumptions that are holding us back in the old model, right? And how do we get rid of those? Again, Dollar Shave versus Gillette. Every single detail. You know what I mean? Like you're right.
Hmm.
It's just unpacking all those assumptions, flipping them upside down, right? Agency does all the marketing. Well, let's get our customer to do the marketing for us, right? So the assumption that the agency knows best, well, maybe the customer knows best. You deliberately flip that assumption, go out there, test it, challenge it, see what happens, and then bring that in. I agree.
Hmm.
That's exactly that's exactly how we design alternative business models, but I don't think it's a different approach or even a different discipline for a function, right?
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
how do we rethink the marketing model or how do we rethink the sales model in the context of creating that breakthrough at the organizational level?
Not to go political, but I think, being here in New York City, I think that the Mamdani campaign is an excellent example of insurgent marketing.
I
The
couldn't
way
agree
that they
more.
went after it, they were phenomenal. Social media, offline. I mean, just the things that he did, was he showed that he was not doing the traditional political playbook in terms of marketing.
I completely agree, right? So these guys are doing their set piece thing up at the top, the typical, usual approach, and Mamdani comes and does everything at the street level. You know what I
Right.
mean? So everything at the street level,
Everything.
right down to the most granular possible level of engagement. And that is like, I can't, that's him acknowledging I can't compete this way against these entrenched politicians, who are applying this particular playbook. I don't have the resources, I don't have the brand name, I don't have any of it. So I'm going to skip all that. I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to create that engagement at the lowest possible level. Um,
Right.
he's also picked up, well, these guys are using linear media. I'm going to do it all on TikTok, for example.
Yeah.
Again, to your point, every assumption, every detail, I'm going to do it in a meaningfully different way. And of course, then you start to see the results. And for people like us that are looking at this, you're sort of watching it. It's no surprise that they get the results because, they've thought very carefully about how to create that different engagement. Um,
Yeah.
but the incumbent, they're seeing it happen to them, but they can't adjust and can't react. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Which is typically almost always what we see, right? And then they
Yeah.
wonder, why did this happen to us? And it was obvious
Yeah.
from day
It
one.
was different. He totally different. He just sort of totally disrupted the way to go about a campaign.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more territory here to talk about, Rondo. I think
Absolutely.
we should continue this, maybe talk a little bit about HR, but I think that we really need to search out and find some guests that are really kind of applying some of these principles successfully in the market. Maybe get Mamdani on here. Um, I don't know, probably not, but we can have a go. But anyway, we're probably
Yeah.
almost out of time. Um, let's uh, let's wrap up for today, and I'll leave it
Well,
to
we
you.
can't wrap up, Matt, without acknowledging that, this is our 1 year anniversary of the Insurgent Mindset.
It is it not? That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So, I think what is this, 26 episodes now, something like that. And
Yeah, something like that.
yeah, so our fortnightly cadence is, yeah, wow, 12 months. So what we'll do, Rondo, I think is we'll have to have a year in review almost, maybe towards the holiday season and look back on some of the episodes that we've had this year and what we've learned. And then maybe we can eat some of our own dog food here and think about what we can do to make this content more valuable for our listener.
Yeah, and thank you to our audience for tuning in and supporting us and sending over ideas for episodes that we should consider. We look forward to continuing that conversation in this new year that we're starting.
Yeah, I mean, keep those questions flowing, and we're always interested to hear your thoughts on great guests that you'd love to hear on the podcast. So, in the spirit of wrapping up, Rondo, I'll do the outro. Please subscribe to the Insurgent Mindset on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and come see us on YouTube. And if you don't have time for that, take a moment and come to our website at insurgentsgroup.com to review some of the blog articles that follow the podcasts. Great to see you, Rondo. We'll catch you next time.
Sounds great, Matt. Take care.
All the best.